Justin Trudeau imposed a 15-day emergency in Canada, completely taking away the freedom and basic rights of the people there and leading to the end of the truckers' protest. The foreign media stayed completely quiet on this despite protesters being assaulted, their bank accounts frozen and also thrown into jail. Today, we have a key voice joining us from Canada who will speak about the situation and really the dent the emergency imposed by Trudeau has left on Canadians. Please welcome John Capri, the President of Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedom Canada, who has spoken to us and who has taken the Canadian Prime Minister to court and vowed to continue this case. Thank you, sir, for joining us on NewsX. My very first question, what is the situation in Canada like right now? The world is completely focused on Ukraine and the situation there, but there was an emergency imposed in Canada not long ago. That's not something one can easily forget.
Well, I think a lot of people still feel traumatized by what happened. There were Canadians who had donated to the truckers' convoy, Freedom Convoy, and it was a peaceful protest. It was not violent. It was not terrorist. And there are people that given, maybe even $20 or $50, not huge amounts of money. And hundreds of Canadians had their bank accounts frozen, which is very traumatic because all of a sudden you cannot buy food. Most people in Canada do not use cash. 90% of the people are using the credit cards and debit cards 90% of the time. So when your bank account gets frozen, you cannot buy groceries for yourself. You cannot feed your children. You cannot buy medicines for sick relatives. And Canadians were shocked. We think that we are a first world country that respects human rights, that we are a functioning democracy, that you can freely criticize the government without any adverse consequences. And here, hundreds of Canadians who donated to the truckers' convoy had their bank accounts frozen. It was a nightmare for those individuals.
Right. India really felt for Canadians when this happened because our elders have also faced an emergency. What was the situation on the ground like?
Well, what triggered the truckers' protest was the federal government, Prime Minister Trudeau, decreed that every trucker must have the COVID injections in order to work. And prior to that, I think the majority of the truckers had already had one or two of the COVID injections, but a significant minority had not. But these people are alone in their own truck all the time. And the Prime Minister declared that in order to cross the borders back and forth between Canada and the United States, and even for truckers to be traveling within Canada, they have to get this COVID shot, which has not been subjected to any long-term safety testing. And that was the straw that broke the camel's back. So around January the 15th, the truckers said, we're going to drive to Ottawa for a peaceful protest. And then it woke up Canadians to the fact, we feel so isolated. Our state broadcaster gives a very pro-government message. And so the state broadcaster is saying that everybody in Canada supports the lockdown measures, all the restrictions on our freedoms. And so if you disagree with mandatory vaccinations, if you disagree with lockdown policies, you feel isolated. You feel like you're the only person that thinks that. But with the truckers' convoy, it became clear that there are millions and millions of Canadians who disagree with the government about the mandatory vaccinations. So that's what started it, was the government saying every trucker needs to be vaccinated in order to work. And the truckers found that unacceptable. And then as the protest grew, there were so many other Canadians that came to support it. There are tens of thousands of Canadians that donated to the Freedom Convoy.
And help us understand the curbs which Canadians felt or had to face, both financially and in humanitarian terms.
Well, so the Emergencies Act was invoked on February 14th, and it was withdrawn very suddenly on February the 23rd. So we had about 10 days of the Emergencies Act. For most Canadians, if your bank account was not frozen, it didn't really make a big difference, but it did have a huge impact on the peaceful protesters in Ottawa because the police came in on horses. Horses trampled people. People were injured. The police assaulted the protesters with truncheons with their police clubs. And this is shocking for Canadians. We think that, this only happens in third world countries, that the police would attack peaceful protesters. These protesters, they did not have guns, they did not have knives, they did not have weapons, they did not have sticks, nothing. And they had been there for 3 weeks. The protest caused some inconvenience to some Ottawa residents. And that was the only city, right, that had the protests. Other cities may have had protests only, for an hour, like a rally. But in Ottawa, it went on for about 3 weeks. It caused some inconvenience, but you could still walk through Ottawa from one part to the other. There was no blockade, there was no occupation, there was no siege, but the streets were quite congested for 3 weeks.
Right, and JCCF, apologies, has taken Trudeau to court as well, if I'm correct. Help us understand where this case is going.
We filed our court action on February 23rd because it took that long, to do a proper court action and to get the affidavits and to do the research, all of these things. We filed the court action on February 23rd, which was the same day that the government lifted the state of emergency. However, we're going to continue with the court action because we want a declaration to say that the invocation of a national emergency was not justified. According to Canada's Emergencies Act, in order for there to be a national emergency, you need a serious threat to the ability of the government of Canada to preserve our security, our sovereignty, and our territorial integrity. So to have crowded, congested streets in Ottawa for 3 weeks, did not threaten Canada's security or sovereignty or territorial integrity. It was just outrageous. It was ludicrous. It was obscene that the government would invoke a national emergency over some inconvenience suffered by some people in the nation's capital. It was crazy.
And what is the lasting impact which you say the emergency has left on Canadians?
For some people, for people who had their bank accounts frozen, yes, they will never forget. For people that were trampled on by horses, by police horses, or horses ridden by policemen, people that were injured. But I also think for people like myself, okay, my bank account was not frozen. I was not in Ottawa. I was not assaulted by police clubs. I wasn't trampled by a horse. But there's a lot of Canadians feel quite concerned that the government would declare this on so trivial a basis. The last time that we had a state of emergency in Canada was in October of 1970, because there was a violent terrorist Quebec separatist group, Front de Libération du Québec, the Quebec Liberation Front. They were exploding bombs in mailboxes. They were exploding bombs in cars. They were kidnapping people. They were holding people hostage. They killed one of their hostages. That was a situation where, okay, some Canadians thought it was wrong to invoke a national emergency, but there was an actively terrorist group in 1970, and so the Canadian government declared the War Measures Act was what it was called at that time, and soldiers were sent into the streets, and the government very aggressively went after this terrorist group, and they arrested hundreds of people, and some of them were thrown in jail without a bail hearing. That was the last time that anything happened. But a peaceful protest in Ottawa that went on for 3 weeks, it just doesn't justify the declaration of a national emergency.
Right, as you say, it doesn't justify the declaration of a national emergency. You also spoke about, how people's rights, were literally trampled on by horses, to speak very literally. Do you feel that there should be more repercussions which the Trudeau government should face for all the actions it has taken?
I think some people who were injured are going to sue the police, and I hope that they are successful. There was just no excuse. In fact, the protesters in Ottawa, they were singing, they were dancing, they were singing the national anthem. They set up bouncy castles, like a play castle for children. There was great unity there. There were people of all religions, all races, French-speaking, English-speaking. It was entirely peaceful. They were cooperating with the police. The police told the protesters where to park their trucks. But it was an embarrassment for the Prime Minister. This is what is the crucial problem. In a democracy, you should be able to criticize your own government without any fear that you're going to be beat up by police or have your bank account frozen or have your printing press shut down if you're a newspaper. So in a fascist state or in what we call banana republic, some of these Central American countries that have they don't have their human rights or the freedom of the press, and they have dictators. In those countries, if you criticize the government, you can expect to get thrown in jail on trumped-up charges. One of the leading organizers of the truckers, Tamara Leach, she is one of the Justice Centre's clients. She is still in jail right now, and it's trumped-up charges. She doesn't own a truck. She didn't drive a truck, and she's being charged on this pretense that somehow she was assisting criminal activity. Right? So Canada has a political prisoner now. Again, what we would expect from other countries, not Canada.
But why do you think that this emergency, which was imposed by Trudeau, not taken up by the UN at all, sir?
I think probably because it was only 10 days, so there wasn't enough time. But I suspect that countries have their right internally to declare a state of emergency. I don't know to what extent the United Nations has anything to say about it, but it was lifted after 10 days.
And do you not think it's taken a dent on Trudeau's popularity and credibility?
Well, I've heard polling results that his popularity has decreased and he has lost some credibility. He still has a majority in Parliament because his Liberal Party is supported by the New Democratic Party, and those two together, they voted in the House of Commons to affirm the declaration of a national emergency because those parties have a majority, and then it had to go to the Senate as well for approval by the Senate, and then it was while the senators were debating it that the Prime Minister suddenly ended it, and a lot of people suspect that he was afraid of losing the vote in the Senate.
And do you think that the Western media has also failed to highlight the extent of the emergency, the extent of suffering which the Canadians really had to go to, considering Ukraine was a main talking point?
Well, I think the international media provided more fair coverage. The Prime Minister started, when the truckers came to Ottawa, even before the truckers came to Ottawa, Prime Minister Trudeau had said publicly that any Canadian who does not take the COVID injections is a racist, misogynist, anti-science extremist who should not be tolerated. So he was already publicly attacking anybody in Canada that is not taking this COVID vaccine. Then when the truckers came, he said that they were racist and they were violent and they were criminal and they were dangerous. And he kept on repeating that every day. These people are dangerous, they're violent, they're racist. And it was just ridiculous because there is Black people and brown people and Asian people, white people, like people of all races were participating in these peaceful protests in Ottawa. It just didn't make any sense. So fortunately, thousands of people had their cell phones and were recording, and anybody could go on the internet, could see that the protest was entirely peaceful. No knives, no guns, no vandalism, no arson, no destruction of property. But yet the Prime Minister, as well as the police chief of the Ottawa Police, they kept on saying this is illegal occupation and it has to end.
And do you think Trudeau's action have set a precedent for other democracies as well?
There's a potential for a bad precedent, and that's one of the reasons why we've taken this to court. Even though the national emergency has now been lifted, we still are proceeding with the court action because we want a declaration that we want the court to rule that the declaration of national emergency was not justified. I find it scary that if a small-scale peaceful protest in one Canadian city can be misconstrued as a serious threat to the security and sovereignty of Canada. I mean, it just doesn't make any sense. A national emergency should be for, a violent insurrection or actual terrorism, or, if there's bombings, or, there could be real reasons for it, but a peaceful protest that went on for 3 weeks. And it's my understanding the farmers' protests in India went on for more than a year, and the government did not declare a national emergency.
And do you think that the emergency has led to a sense of lack of resolution? Do you fear that things could get worse?
Well, I think it was the opposite. I think it was a great awakening for Canadians, because what happened as these truckers were driving to Ottawa, and so we had truckers from the province of British Columbia on the Pacific Ocean. All the trucks were moving east across the Rocky Mountains, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, all the provinces. But we also had truckers from the Atlantic coast driving in through Quebec towards Ottawa. And as these truckers were moving along, what happened was Canadians from the towns and cities came out to the highways, and they had signs and they cheered. And we lost our sense of isolation, because we've had the violation of rights and freedoms for almost 2 years now, since March of 2020, and now we're in March of 2022. It's been illegal to gather together with your family. It's illegal to participate in sports. Children's sports are shut down. Adults sports shut down. You can't eat in restaurants. Restrictions on houses of worships, temples and synagogues and gurdwaras and churches and mosques have been closed. We've had all these violations of our rights and freedoms in the past 23 months. So when the truckers were protesting, it was great, because previously, if there was 5,000 people in a city that were going to rally for revocation of all of these lockdown measures and mandatory vaccinations, the media would not cover it. You could have a rally with 5,000, 10,000 people. The media would not talk about it. So how would you know that the rally was going on? But with the truckers' protest, what changed is that even the media who are pro-lockdown, pro-vaccine passport, pro-government, they had to report on the truckers' protest. They had to. And that was great, because then for the first time, all the Canadians could see we're not alone. There's other people who love freedom that want to get rid of these very harmful, destructive, and unscientific lockdown measures.
Well, absolutely, and it is a flagrant violation of the freedom, of life of the people of Canada. Very interesting to see your take on the same. For now, thank you, sir, for joining us on NewsX.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.